What are the biggest mistakes you see new screenwriters make their first screenplay?
You mean literarily or?
Structurally, dialogue, character, length?
Because the biggest mistakes they make is usually their personalities, but
Of the actual writer, or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But that aside, I think the biggest mistake is over-explaining and not knowing how to tunnel the background of the story into the story instead of laying it out. Like, we just developed a brilliant screenplay for the last several years in which the opening conversation just is not convincing because there is no other explanation for the words in the conversation other than explaining to the audience what's going on. And that's a hard to avoid mistake because you've got to explain what's going on. But if you do it overtly, the audience is going to not believe the dialogue. They're not going to believe, they're going to not be able to suspend their disbelief. So you have to sneak these things into the story at times when they're needed and not too much too soon. One of the common mistakes, I think the root mistake beneath that mistake is thinking that the audience is not as smart as they are. It's looking down on your audience. Because respecting the audience is essential to good storytelling. You have to believe in the audience. And imagine sitting on this country porch and telling a story with no audience, right? I find that very hard to imagine because storytelling is about audiences. You can immediately start telling the story if even one person shows up. But sitting there and telling it by yourself, that isn't what a story is, right? So if one person shows up and it's Jackie, you're going to tell it differently than if Sally showed up first. And if Sally and Jackie are there together, you're going to tell it differently than you would have to either one of them by themselves. That's just the nature of human communication. So not respecting the audience or not realizing that it's all about the audience is probably the biggest mistake. And it takes a while to get out of that mistake because the only way to get out of it is through constant feedback that tells you it's not necessary. Because somebody told me once, like, an editor is the person who tells a writer when to stop writing. And I thought that was actually a lot of truth to that, because how's a writer going to know unless somebody says you don't need that? And I think that is often the case with first screenwriters is they put a lot of things in they don't need. We need much less than you think we do. We don't need a scene to come to an end. It's okay to cut out of it. I mean, writers are constantly have a great line at the end of a scene, but then they add a couple of more lines. They're insecurity lines, they call them. So we instantly just cross them out because they already had a great line. That's the end of the scene. And yes, everything hasn't been quite wrapped up, but that adds energy. When you cut that, you're pouring energy into the story. When you leave it there, you're sucking energy out of the story because the audience is like bored through those last two lines and going, why did we need that? I'm out of it at, you had me at a low, kind of, And I think that's probably the most common mistake is overwriting, just overwriting.
You said earlier personality?
Well, screenwriters have to be careful with their personalities because by nature they're very overtly, at least, self-confident, aggressive people. Mostly that's a mask for lack of self-confidence, which is a normal thing for a writer to have. We all have that. No matter what stage you reach, you'll always have the lack of self-confidence, but then the world's divided into those who do it anyway and those who let that stop them from doing it. Every actor has that before he goes on stage. Some of the greatest actors, Richard Chamberlain, used to throw up before he went on stage. But he went on stage. I mean, it was just part of what he did. You get nervous before you start, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. If you weren't nervous, then you're not doing something important. So, if you're going into battle on the battlefield, should you be afraid? Yes. If you weren't afraid, you'd be nuts. So I think that's what happens in personality is that sometimes people compensate in an over-aggressive way, and it's an automatic turnoff, because one of the several things about succeeding in Hollywood is don't get on everyone's life is too short list. I mean, and it's really true. I mean, that it's sometimes you get on it immediately and you'll never get off of it. It's very hard to break it. And you have to, realize that you need to act with the people in the business the way you would act with true friends, and who will tell you you're an asshole if you're being an asshole. But Hollywood won't. They'll just say, thank you so much for coming. We'll be in touch with you, and that'll be the end of it. But they'll go, asshole, as soon as he's out of the room. And demanding, it's part of demanding, because there's a kind of petulance that sets in the longer a writer has worked without, reward and acclamation and compensation. And it's almost like, I deserve this, you're going to give it to me now. I had an actress at dinner one night, and in the middle of dinner she said, a lot of other people, she said, I demand attention now. And it was really funny because the men thought that was cute and the women did not. They did not. She was not re-invited.
Oh, no.
No, the women definitely did not like that petulance, because, men thought it was
Sure.
cute because she was sexy and so on. But in today's world, especially Hollywood, where the stakes are so high, everybody wants to get in. Thousands of people are lined up for every single position you could ask for. And they want people who are cool and professional, not hot-headed and demanding. And when I see a writer is of the latter category, I just kind of run for the hills. And when I see a writer is not that way, when he's modest and so on, I will continue talking to him for years, even before I represent him or work with him, until I find something that I can work with, because he's so respectful and so not on my too short list. That's a very rare thing, but it's important when you think about it in any walk of life. You're not gonna the uncle who you can't stand to see at Thanksgiving is not the one that you want to be representing or making a movie with.
Is that when, sorry to interrupt. Is that when someone's too self-aggrandizing? Like, it's just, this is the greatest thing, and they won't take no for an answer, and it just becomes,
yeah, I mean, that's part of it, because you don't tell us how great it is, just tell us the story. Get out of the way, of the story. We don't want to hear this is your first pitch. We don't want to hear, you haven't done this much. We don't want to hear that you practice this and that you know exactly what to say. We want to see if you've got the goods, and that is the story. Like Mark Twain said, don't tell us the fat lady is going to sing. Bring her out and let her sing. That's what we want to see. In other words, don't draw attention to yourself, because that is not what we're interested in. We're interested in the story. And maybe we'll get interested in you later, like after you brought a couple of good stories in, then we go, by the way, where are you from? And, what's your story? But we don't want to deal with it at the beginning, because the truth is, no matter who you are, if your story's good, we love you. We love because you told this story. And that's a great, kind of equalizer when you think about it. It's a real world of ideas. But if you start telling us about yourself and give us a chance to hate you before you even started telling the story, how stupid is that? And I have to say that years ago, I stopped taking writers to pitches of their stories, because they most of the time unsold the story after they sold it.
Oh, no.
For a very simple reason. They weren't looking at the buyer. They were in a coma. They were telling the story, and they weren't watching the buyer's eyes, which is all that matters in a pitch. Like, I can see immediately if you're bored, and I'm gonna, if I'm anybody at all, I'll switch to another story to pitch you. Because that's what the buyer is thinking. Do I like this story? Can I do something with it? But sometimes he'll just hear one word, dragon, and that'll be it. Click, my eyes go like, let's see, I've got a 3:15 and then I've got a 3:30. My brain is thinking about other things, because I know I can't acquire a dragon story. So why am I wasting this person's time? Well, the person's not even listening and looking at you, so he goes on talking. But the other thing happens too. He's already said enough to sell you. This is what you're looking for. I can see it in your eyes. But he keeps talking. So after a while now, the buyer is looking at him. Instead of listening to the story, he's looking at him going, why is this guy still talking? I love this. I want to ask some questions. You know what I mean? So that's an example of a writer forgetting about the most important part of his story, which is the audience. His audience, the reader, the audience is the most important part of the story. And when you forget it, they know. The reader knows that you've forgotten him. And then they're tuned out. They close the book.